보단. 헤이. 후. 와. 헤이. 바보 바보.
I got your letters.
With its expansive and distinct world, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 delivers a satisfying mix of story, exploration, and deep combat that makes it one of the standout role-playing games of the year. Some navigational trouble pads out its running time a bit, but in a game that offers at least 70 hours of adventure, the vast majority of it is a joy to journey through. This world where people live on the backs of continent-sized titans has a long history of games behind it, but fortunately, you don't need to be familiar with that to jump in cold here. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 tells a fascinating tale of a salvager boy named Rex, who stumbles into a permanent bond with one of the world's most powerful living weapons. Naturally, some bad guys want that power for themselves, and they're very persistent. Many of the boss battles have you fighting against the same baddies over and over again. Excellent English language voice acting and richly imagined characters with strong personalities usually prevent this fantastical scenario from slipping too forcefully into cliché and repetition. You'll definitely find some JRPG silliness mixed into all the heady philosophical talk about the living blades, their human drivers, and the dark nature of the world. But Xenoblade Chronicles 2 stands out for its optimistic view that the diverse cultures of the world can overcome their differences for the greater good. Adventures through these cultures help grant Xenoblade Chronicles 2 impressive visual variety as it leads you through landscapes ranging from snowy wastes to idyllic villages where the people live in harmony with nature. They're rewarding to visit too because many locations change with the tides and towns reach new development levels based on your activities, which nets discounts and better items. These zones are often huge, which is sometimes a double-edged sword because of poor navigation. One of your only indications of where a quest needs to go is a directional marker on the compass at the top of the screen, and it's often not clear how to get the objectives because of the otherwise impressive verticality of the landscapes. Figuring out how to reach something far above or below can take an hour or so of wandering until you find the path. The skip travel map helps a bit, but the menus are annoying as a whole, and especially so in this case because it doesn't automatically open the map for the zone you're in. The anime art style allows for expressive faces and a timeless look, although it does make the few characters with 3D models stick out like sore thumbs. In docked mode, it runs at a resolution below 1080p by default, and even then we saw occasional frame rate drops with large groups on screen. Late in the campaign, there were also strange dubbing issues in which voices were about 5 seconds out of sync.
Frankly, I don't think they've got much interest in what you have to say.
Why not?
Xenoblade Chronicles 2's combat almost seems laughably simple at first. It's based on a system of auto attacks in which you're supposed to activate one of your 3 abilities on the action buttons when an auto attack sequence finishes. You also need to move around your opponent to take advantage of positional bonuses. But the slow introduction of new features reveals that it's actually satisfyingly complex after only around 4 hours, and the tutorial continues to roll them out to the point where it's still exposing helpful new information 50 hours in. Much of this complexity springs from the blades, who align with a particular element like water and each have a specialized weapon for their driver. Each of the decent-sized cast of playable characters has a main blade, but you can also unlock many alternate ones with different role specializations, elemental alignments, or even masteries for interaction with the world. You only control a single driver during each battle, but making sure the other two members of your party complement your skills and role is essential to victory. It's rewarding when you figure out which elemental combos and skills help you topple particularly troublesome enemies, or fill a bar that unleashes a cool tag team attack. This system encourages creative thinking as well. There were several times when a boss seemed unbeatable, but smartly switching out blades and managing gear to take advantage of certain elemental weaknesses brought them down. Blades are essentially party members too, and you can undertake side quests with them and unlock mastery ranks. This makes it easier to knock down certain barricades you find in the world for shortcuts. Unfortunately, for a whole 50 or 60 hours, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 gives you the impression that these are merely optional, but then you reach a spot in the main story where you absolutely need specific masteries to progress. That halts the flow of the story at an urgent point and can take hours because you'll need to hunt down consumables, hunt specific beasts, and undertake specific side quests to boost the masteries. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is a standout RPG that manages to keep its story, combat, and exploration interesting over the course of at least 70 hours of adventure through an impressively varied and rich world. Getting from place to place can be confusing, but outside of that and a multi-hour progression roadblock near the end, it's an excellent game full of tough, memorable battles and a positive message. For more, check out the first 17 minutes of gameplay of Xenoblade Chronicles 2.
Astounding!
It's a new era for the world of Formula One, with some of the biggest changes seen in the sport in decades shaking up not only the status quo, but also the spines of the drivers as teams wrestle to rein in the engineering quirks of this year's new cars. Codemasters has followed suit with F1 22, stopping short of infusing this season's back-busting, porpoising phenomenon into its handling model, but tinkering just enough with its reliably robust annual racer that it does feel sufficiently refreshed in a number of the right areas, even if the overall package is bound to be a pretty familiar one to returning fans. Rest assured, there is more to F1 22 than simply a stable of the latest cars and the new Miami circuit. Visually, it's treading water this year, but small touches like neat new post-race clips of the battle-worn cars and updated camera angles on the old podium celebrations slightly rejuvenate parts of Codemasters' F1 series that have been stagnant for many years. The new race engineer and the ability to switch out commentator David Croft for Alex Jakes,
Why don't we talk about Ferrari?
similarly helps set F1 22 apart from the previous F1 games, which have been feeling increasingly recycled in this department. A new adaptive AI mode joins the standard and already huge list of driver aids and accessibility options, and seems to keep the pack within striking distance of less experienced racers, making for more exciting racing regardless of skill. I watched my 8-year-old duke it out with the adaptive AI, and while I can't quite observe the difference between the two available levels of it, it did seem to keep him in the hunt without making the AI roll over entirely. Bigger bullet points like the welcome inclusion of the F1 sprint race format and slick VR support for PC players are obviously harder to miss. The F1 series is quite late to the table when it comes to VR support, so I think it's unlikely veterans of other existing VR racing games will be wowed in quite the same way we were some years ago, but the novelty value of having it available in the official F1 series is very strong. With its dedication to replicating the minutiae of the real thing from the paddock to the track, the F1 series has been a wonderfully immersive recreation of the world's premier motorsport for some time. Experiencing it through a VR lens is doubly so.
Yes, fantastic! You just won the Grand Prix!
However, not every new feature of F1 22 earns a spot on the podium. With Codemasters confirming earlier this year that further installments of the Breaking Point story mode it introduced in F1 2021 are on a 2-year cadence, F1 22 does not include the next chapter of the studio's airbrushed yet earnest take on a fictional behind-the-scenes F1 fairy tale. In its place is F1 Life, a lifestyle-oriented mode focused on customizing your F1 driver's outfit and living areas. But it feels so vapid that it largely amounts to little more than a monetizable backdrop for the main menu screens. F1 22 puts the focus on this new mode by throwing you straight into tinkering with F1 Life's default settings on first launch.
This is your F1 Life.
The good thing about this is that afterward, it can be entirely ignored, and doing so ultimately doesn't diminish anything about the typically robust racing experience around it. At best, F1 Life seems like a catch-all to justify a steady stream of rewards for your time playing, only those rewards are just bits of furniture and floor tiles. At worst, it's a mechanism that's here to shake some loose change out of people willing to hand over a few bucks for a cosmetic trinket. Other players can visit your space, but I don't really understand why they'd want to. It's probably a sad sign of the times that while previous F1 games featured iconic cars from the sport's history, F1 22 features an extensive set of designer rugs, lounges, and lamps. No one's been excited about a lamp since Jafar played fullback for Agrabah. In theory, I understand the desire to capture a taste of that lucrative off-track luxury that real-life F1 superstars get to enjoy, and yes, I did get momentarily distracted by the V6 coffee table, but I don't know if adding interior decorating and the ability to dress your driver avatar like an aspiring Puma activewear influencer was the perfect way to do that. The addition of collectible supercars feels a little closer to the kinds of extravagant toys real-life F1 drivers can afford, and there is at least a gameplay component attached to these. Taking some broad inspiration from the Pirelli Hot Laps program that runs at Real Grands Prix, where F1 drivers are conscripted to hurl expensive exotics around the tracks with various VIPs aboard. F1 22 includes high-end supercars from Ferrari, AMG, Aston Martin and McLaren for both hot lapping and a selection of bespoke driving challenges. They're an interesting novelty, very different from anything present in previous F1 games, but in practice they do become a bit one-note, and I eventually found myself opting to skip them. Through no fault of anyone, the supercars themselves are comparatively soggy when measured up to the purpose-built open-wheelers that represent the pinnacle of current F1 engineering, but they do convey a decent enough sense of speed, grip and weight when compared to their contemporaries in rival races. The drifting is surprisingly unspectacular though. A severe lack of smoke leaves it feeling oddly sterile. The real stars of F1 22, of course, are the new F1 cars, which are the sleekest looking in many years, though saddled with a few interesting handling idiosyncrasies that demand some adjustments from F1 2021. With their bigger wheels and tyres, plus their added bulk, 2022's F1 cars are the heaviest they've ever been. They're also lower and stiffer, with less top body downforce and a renewed focus on ground effect aerodynamics, sucking the cars into the asphalt the faster they go. In F1 22, this is translated to cars that feel like they've lost a fraction of their nimbleness and feel a little more violent over curbs and humps. Additionally, I've found I've needed to be even more delicate on the throttle coming out of corners than in previous years, though they also seem a little more prone to understeer coming into them. The upshot is a handling model that I'd hesitate to say is better than that of the old cars in F1 2021 and previous editions, but it is one that feels credibly in line with the known characteristics of the new ones. It's just different, and the nuances of the new cars are, at a minimum, an interesting challenge to tackle. However, while some noticeable changes have been injected into the handling, the real meat of F1 22, the excellent My Team mode first introduced in F1 2020, remains mostly the same. Campaign through GPs, complete R&D, juggle finances. If you've played through F1 2020 or F1 2021, you'll know what to expect. There are a couple of nice amendments though, like the new choice to start your first year of My Team as a richly backed operation with pre-upgraded facilities and a fat enough bank balance to lure a 45-year-old Mark Webber out of his comfortable retirement.
The more you offer, the greater the chance of them agreeing to it.
The F1 series has always been one of the few races that can make scrapping for a position down the order thrilling, but having the ability to tussle with the top teams straight away makes a lot of sense for returning players who've steered their F1 teams from minnows to megastars multiple times already. Sponsorship decals no longer disappearing off your car despite re-signing existing partners is nice too. It's a small fix, but it was always annoying having to manually put them back on mid-season, even after rolling over their contracts. With its typically deep and rich career mode and its usual class-leading spectrum of assists and difficulty options, F1 22 maintains this series' run as the most fully featured and accessible reproduction of a single modern motorsport on the market, and long-awaited tweaks to some of its most reused elements haven't gone unnoticed either. It's not quite as bold as F1 2021 though, and the footwear and furniture-focused F1 Life mode really isn't a patch to cover the lack of more of last year's ambitious story mode. For more recent reviews, check out our verdicts on Starship Troopers Terran Command and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge. For everything else, stay on IGN.
Oh man, that's it! It's all over and you are the world champion! What a drive! What a season! Well done!
And so the celebrations begin, and well earned they are indeed. It may have looked simple at times, but as any racing driver will tell you, competing at this level, at the very top...